Mr. Massey, recognized, 5 minutes.
I agree with the gentleman's amendment. I don't think that E-Verify should be part of this title. We've got federal databases. We've got, and I'm against them in order to exercise your basic fundamental human rights. You shouldn't have to go through a NICS database to exercise your Second Amendment. You shouldn't have to go through an E-Verify database to exercise your basic fundamental human right to trade labor for sustenance, to trade labor for money that you, to support your family. We've got no-fly lists in this country. I'm against no-fly lists. We've got a host of federal databases, and they've all been put in place in the name of fairness or safety or something that sounds good, but at the end of the day, it's used for other purposes. You know, we've got the people discussing central bank digital currency. What's that all about? Well, that's to make sure that if you don't have the government's permission, that you're not going to be able to exchange money. We've got Real ID. Okay, this Real ID, everybody's now got to submit heightened biometric and personal information in order just to have an ID, a picture ID in this country. It's not state by state, it's federal at this point. And Real ID was a promise. Go back, look, a decade ago when they started Real ID. Oh, we're gonna do Real ID so illegal aliens can't fly on airplanes, they can't go into federal buildings. We're gonna make sure they can't get driver's licenses. BS. It was put into place and it was gonna solve the immigration issue, the illegal immigration issue. It didn't solve anything. It just created more mandates on law-abiding, God-fearing, honest Americans. Why? I mean, I would hope that our side of the aisle would recognize at this point. We've seen here recently in our weaponization committee that the federal government created lists of people who should be censored, people who didn't deserve the right to speak in a forum, in a social media forum. So why are we making another list? These always get turned against us, and they're never used for the purpose that they were intended for. Look at the Patriot Act. Come on, folks. All of 9/11 was used to create more lists so that law-abiding Americans could exercise their rights that were given to them by God. This is wrong. I don't know if the gentleman said it's not the time for E-Verify. I would say there's never a time for E-Verify. Don't hold back, my colleague from California, Mr. Correa. You're right on this. We don't need another federal database. Look, wow, let's try this. E-Verify, why don't we just use the NICS database for firearms? Run you through the NICS. Make sure you can pass a NICS background before you can work. I wonder if E-Verify is going to be as accurate as NICS is. Because 100,000 people a year in NICS are denied their fundamental right to exercise the Second Amendment because the government thinks they have a name similar to another person who shouldn't be allowed to own a firearm. 12 prosecutions. Let me get to this point too. Out of 100,000 people, 112,000 denied in NICS in any given year, 12 get prosecuted. Wow, what a ratio. Are we gonna deport people who fail E-Verify? You know, if that were in this bill, my colleague from California, I might be able to vote for this. If we were actually going to do something, we're turning the employer into the police officer because we won't solve the problem elsewhere. But after the police officer catches the person trying to get a job, trying to work for their families, what are we going to do with that, with the person who is trying to break the law, who's trying to work without permission? Are we going to deport this illegal alien once we've identified them? Hell no, it's not going to happen. And another thing I'm saying, oh, it's working so great in the states. We should do this federally. If it's working so great in the states, let the states do it. We do not need another federal database like NICS, Real ID, no-fly lists, central bank digital currencies in order for God-fearing Americans, law-abiding Americans to exercise their fundamental human rights. And I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Who seeks recognition? If not, the question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The roll call is requested, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa. Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Buck. Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Gates. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana.
No.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock. Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Tiffany.
No.
Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey.
Yes.
Mr. Massey votes yes. Mr. Roy. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Sparks. Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Bentz. Mr. Klein. Mr. Gooden. Mr. Gooden votes no. Mr. Van Drew. Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels.
No.
Mr. Nels votes no. Mr.